The Lord be with you. We were a little late coming out of church, but that's all right. We're here now. We'll go ahead and start. More people will come down. You guys know that I already talk overtime according to pastor, so I don't have the extra luxury of waiting. We'll go ahead and begin with our first page, or we will begin with prayer. Let me just pull this up real quick. Just wanting to go a little slowly today. Let us pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we pray and thank you for your word, and pray that as we read it, as we learn about it, that we hear your will for us, Lord, that we may read, mark, learn, and take to heart all that you have commanded us, and learn from your story of everything, how we fit into it, Lord, and how it centers on Christ, whether we're in the beginning of the Bible or the end of it. All this we pray in your precious and holy name. Amen. All right, so I thought pastor's gone, and so this is the one time that I would figure I would use this so that he can't see me using his stuff. I don't actually remember all of it, so this was just one of the few things I do remember from confirmation, learning from his kids having to teach me when I was supposed to be reviewing with them. So looking at the nation of Israel, we are in the end of Deuteronomy, beginning of Joshua. And if you remember, the Bible is split into two parts. They are the Old Testament and the New Testament. All right. Joshua, Deuteronomy, we right now are in the Old Testament. There are 5 parts of the Old Testament. What are they? They are the Torah, history, poetic, major prophets, minor prophets. So Deuteronomy is in which of those? Torah. Joshua, that we are moving into, is in which category? History. So we are moving into a new category. We're now on the pointer finger. Pastor will be filling this out more and more as we go, but since we started and I knew what the word for Joshua was, I thought I would put the diagram in there. So he's got a different word that goes with each of the books to describe what's happening in the book. So Joshua, the word that goes with that is conquers. Joshua conquers. I'm going to open that back up and make sure that that's not messages. It is not. All right, people just coming in. Speak up, Zoom, if you can't hear me. So Joshua conquers. And so this is kind of the big theme of Joshua. They're entering the promised land, and they are beginning their takeover of what God has promised them. And this time period, the time period of history here, Joshua to Esther, is a time period of around 1400 BC to 400 BC. So as we read through the history, the poetic and the prophets happen within this history. So that's why we can say that Malachi is the last prophet at 400 BC. There is no other prophet until we get to John the Baptist. And Esther also goes towards that end time. The history here of Israel, of the Old Testament that we have, starting here in Joshua, is around 1400 BC to 400 BC, the reign of Israel before all that fun intertestamental stuff happened that is important enough that I'm sure Pastor will talk to you about it some other time. But the book of Joshua. So we just started the book of Joshua. I wanted to give you an overview of the book, of what we'll be looking at as we go. So there are 4 sections to the book of Joshua. In the beginning, the first 5 chapters, so much of what we read today, is preparation for taking the land. So Joshua takes over leadership. He moves the people to the Jordan River. The Lord gives a bunch of promises to him, a bunch of encouragement, and then they cross the Jordan River, again splitting the water there. They come across, they build the altar, they go through circumcision, they do rest, they do the Passover. they're preparing to take the land, rededicating themselves in a way to the Lord. So that's the first 5 chapters of Joshua. From 5 to 12, we get the land being captured. So we get, for those of you who are in the church service, you got a sneak peek of that, reading about or hearing about the walls of Jericho. For those of you who haven't been to service yet, there's your sneak peek of what the sermon is going to be about. So the walls of Jericho. But the land is being captured in this first part of Joshua. The land in 13 to 21, the land gets split up according to the different tribes. I've got some images we'll show you there in a bit. And then at the end of Joshua, the heirs of the land respond. They have to choose a new leader because Joshua is also dying at the end of the book. And Israel needs to figure out, okay, what's the next step? We had Moses, now we had Joshua. He's gone. Who's next? So that's the book of Joshua laid out. And as much as I would love to jump into Joshua, I don't know if you figured this out. Somebody had to tell me, we finish a book at the end of the month, right? That's how we finished Deuteronomy and the previous ones. They try to make it for the end of the month, which is great until the end of the month is the middle of the week. So we have the last 2 chapters of Deuteronomy and then a nice big chunk of Joshua. So we do have to, I feel like it would be remiss to not go back and do some of Deuteronomy. This ending of Deuteronomy is important. The death of Moses, the blessings that he gives to the tribes, it's worthwhile to talk about. So we won't get, I was having a big fight trying to figure out what can I put into this because there's so much that I could talk about. So Moses blesses the people. This is chapter 33 of Deuteronomy. Just as there has been a rededication of the covenant with the people of Israel, laying out everything for them, so are their blessings set over them once again, with a few distinct differences. So the blessings that Jacob gave to his sons in Genesis, where he blessed each son, told him of his tribe that would come in the nation of Israel, those same blessings get redone by Moses here. But there's a little bit of a difference. So from your reading, there was a tribe that is not mentioned. I'm wondering if anybody picked up on that. Nope, the Levites were mentioned. All right, I'll tell you so we don't just sit in silence. That's okay. I read through it, questioned it, read through it again, and then went to a commentary just to make sure that I wasn't missing the name somewhere. The tribe of Simeon is not mentioned in these blessings by Moses. So Simeon ends, and I'll show you a map here in just a second to kind of give you an idea of what's happening with Simeon, but he doesn't actually get his own land. He has about a dozen cities inside of Judah, and that's where the tribe of Simeon lives. They aren't a large tribe, and there's a reason for this, right? So this tribe of Simeon and Levi, if you go all the way back to Genesis again and remember remember the history we read about there, right, in the Torah, Simeon and Levi had their sister Dinah was going to get married to some people in Shechem, and Simeon and Levi were like, no, you're not, and they went and killed everybody. And Jacob ends up cursing them for their violence. And their violence is mentioned inside of Jacob's blessings to his children. Your violence is a curse upon you. And so both tribes ended up cursed because of that. Reuben also messed up. This is, this is really going back, but when we talk about how the blessing of Christ goes through Judah, the fourth born, that's because Reuben messed up, slept with his stepmother, not his mother, but the other concubine, trying to get the inheritance as firstborn, some weird Old Testament stuff that I didn't want to go back and re-look up. But Reuben messed up, so he didn't get the blessing of the Christ. Simeon and Levi messed up, so they didn't get the blessing of the Christ, so it goes to Judah. But we do see Levi, the tribe of Levi, mentioned in this blessing by Moses. It's actually got quite a long blessing and is pretty favorable. So why didn't Levi receive the same punishment? While Levi had the same punishment as Simeon, the Levites ended up forgiven due to the actions of Phinehas at Shittim. That's how I'm gonna say that name. That is the best way I can think to say that name without getting into any trouble. So at Shittim, in Numbers, the Israelites were going after the Moabite women, and therefore they were going and sacrificing to the Moabite gods and the other idolatry that goes along with that. And when an Israelite and a Moabite came to the tent of meeting after in the middle of Israel weeping, right? So Israel was weeping about the fact that they were being punished for idolatry and throwing out a lot of the intermarriage that was happening that was leading to it. An Israelite and a Moabite came to the entrance of the tent of meeting in the midst of all the weeping. So I don't know. That sounds a little antagonistic just reading through, but I didn't look at a commentary to double check that one. I feel like that's antagonistic. So they came there, and Phinehas, the grandson of Aaron, took a spear and killed them both. And the Lord blessed him for his zealousness to the blotting out of idolatry. And so the tribe of Levi was forgiven that sin of violence, ironically, for more violence, but violence for the right cause, which is the rooting out of idolatry that was taking place, this blatant show that of ignorance of that, and then Phinehas acting out against it. So that's why Levi didn't receive the same punishment. They were forgiven because of Phinehas, the priest. Some other interesting tribes, so I'll pull up that picture here just to give you guys an idea of what the tribes looked like. So there's Simeon down at the bottom. So Simeon wasn't mentioned at all. He's really just a number of cities. Is that large enough for you? Yeah. So Simeon's there at the bottom, just a number of cities inside the area of Judah. Some maps will show him as having the whole desert. Most of them show it like this. They really are only given a number of cities. Judah has the south there. And as we look through, Reuben is said to be small because of his sin. He never has any kings or great people. And being to the east, he's often attacked by other nations. And so he's on the other side of the Jordan River there. So he's often being attacked by Moab and the Ammonites and a few of the other tribes that they didn't fight. Gad, or I guess I'll go in order here. Judah was a prayer for the Lord to be with them. And some say that this prayer is answered in the coming of Jesus. So Judah's blessing was actually a prayer for the Lord to be with him and to raise him up. Benjamin had some really interesting language where it talks about sitting on the shoulders. Really sounds like a little kid on his father's shoulders. Benjamin being the favorite child. And it even plays out a little bit if you look here between Judah and Ephraim. Benjamin is sitting surrounded and protected. And so two images there, Benjamin being the favorite son and sitting on his father's shoulders, but also protected by two of the powerful tribes there in the south, Ephraim and Judah. Manasseh and Ephraim, Joseph's sons, are both very important tribes. Many earthly blessings were given to them, and you can see that while Judah received the spiritual blessing of Christ, Manasseh and Ephraim, being Joseph's sons, received a lot of land and a lot of favorable land as their earthly blessing for being Jacob's favorite. And so you see that the tribe of Manasseh there is absolutely huge. They faced a lot of they were kind of a defense on the north there, but also had a lot of the inside land as their own for being one of the favored tribes, the favored son of Jacob. Zebulun liked to go out, and Issachar stayed in their tents. So there's a fun commentary that just calls Issachar a bit on the lazy side, right? They work hard for the easy life, is the way that they phrase it. I would say that my brother would be a great Issacharite. He goes and he does his work for the city so that he can go and drink beer and play golf and do not much else, right? So he works hard for the easy life. And nothing else really gets done, and nothing else has the motivation except for the working so that he can go and golf. He's not going to listen to that, but he would probably laugh at this. So it's all right. My brother would be a good Issacharite. I guess that's what they would call them. Yes. So yeah, right there. Issachar and Zebulun are next to each other, some of the smaller tribes there, later sons. You then have Asher along the coast and Naphtali in the north. And you've got Gad there between Manasseh and Reuben, the brownish black spot. And they were one of the strongest tribes in terms of warriors. They, even when David was anointed and Saul was hunting him down, it was some Gadites who came to his defense. Strong warriors, ready for battle, good with the sword, with the shield and spear. And so Gad was very much a strong arm of the Israelite army. And when they crossed the Jordan, Manasseh, Gad, and Reuben were the armed vanguard because the rest of the tribes hadn't settled down yet. And so all their warriors had to go across the Jordan for the conquering with the rest of Israel, even though they were already settled down. Dan should be a viper, but actually runs from them later on. Dan, we'll see this at the end of Joshua, but Dan pulls some trickery and ends up also, because he can't deal with the Philistines, also ends up here in the north taking some land and having the northernmost city of Israel. I didn't look that far ahead, but we have something to look forward to. What does Dan do? What trickery do they pull so that they get some northern land away from the Philistines? And they kind of cross that off there. So yes, it would have been remiss not to cover some of that end of Deuteronomy. So we again see those God's promises to the tribes of Israel to give them land, but also to provide through them salvation to all creation. So Christ Jesus being promised to and delivered through the tribe of Judah. We then have Moses' death after having gone up to Mount Nebo to the top of Pisgah, just one of the peaks there. Moses was allowed to see the land of Israel that he wouldn't be allowed to enter for his own anger, and that rose up that he was punished for. And then he died. The Lord buried him, and his grave was never found. Nobody could ever find the grave of Moses. God made sure of that. Why would God make sure the grave of Moses was hidden? They would probably, I don't know who said that. Somebody muttered it, but yes, you could have spoken up on that one. You're right. Imagine that for the last 40 years, you had somebody doing like crazy miracles and leading you through the desert, making sure that you never went hungry or thirsty, and putting up with you, honestly. Just dealing with all of your complaining and whining that Israel tends to do. Sounds like a parent. And then Moses dies before they go into the promised land. If they could have found Moses' grave, how easily would it have been for them to go in for idolatry, raising up Moses or his body as something special? I mean, we see, to a lesser extent, we see the same thing happen in the Catholic Church, where they take bones of the saints and believe that there's some kind of power or special spirituality to those, right? The same thing absolutely would have been done to Moses if the Israelites could have found his body, because Moses was the greatest prophet to ever live. We can say that in terms of what he did, those 40 years from the plagues to what he's done and being able to go up to the mountain and receive the commandments from God. Moses was the greatest prophet to live in the Old Testament that there ever was or ever would be. You could argue then that, John the Baptist, when we get to the New Testament, is the least of these, but the greatest prophet. But in terms of actions of God, right, when you're reading the stories, Moses sounds pretty big and in view. Like if you're looking at them, Moses's picture is huge, and you kind of get stuck focusing on that as the 10 plagues surround him, right? If you were to imagine it as art. So Moses would have been idolatrized. I think that might be the word for it. Idolized. Thank you. Sometimes you make it too hard, right? So, to give you a little bit of information on who Joshua is, I laid this out. I don't think we're going to go through all of it so that we can get to some of the other interesting stuff. But this has the Bible verses and all the instances that we see of Joshua being lifted up for the purpose of ruling after Moses. So our first mention of him in Exodus when Joshua was the one leading the battle against the Amalekites, and Moses had to lift his arms up, and Aaron and Hur were helping him. Joshua was the one who took men down to fight. And we see that his name is brought up again and again as he continues to be the servant of Moses, and acting on him there. We also see that Joshua was commissioned to replace Moses then, and is filled with the spirit of wisdom. So Joshua has a long list of qualifications to be the next leader of Israel. So the 4 P's of God's word. The Lord urged Joshua to get into his word so that the word could get into Joshua, being constantly within it, filled by it, learning from it, led by it. And so in the opening chapter of Joshua, we see both God's command and instruction to Joshua and Israel's promise to follow him. If you read, as you read through, I'm just going to give the quotes, but they're all from that first chapter. God's word is permanent. The book of the law shall not depart from your mouth. There should be no time where you are not in the word and the word is in you. God's word is pervasive. Meditate on it day and night. It should be becoming a part of your life. God's word is purposeful, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. God's word is there for a purpose. There's a reason that we read, mark, learn, and take it to heart, so that we can live according to it. And God's word is powerful. Then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have good success. Now, again, whenever we hear the word prosperous, we always want to be careful and not think that just because I pray, God's going to let me win the lottery. It would be nice. I would love to win the lottery. I don't think my prayer to do it is going to get it, especially when I don't go and buy tickets. But, you know, if they called my ticket that I didn't have, that would be great. But God's word is powerful. And the way I always talk about this, when we talk about when God mentions that he has plans for you, when he's powerful, when he'll make you prosperous, when he'll give you success. Jeremiah 29:11 is a great version of this, right? When he says, I have plans for you, plans for insert all the good things here. It's always good to understand that those plans for good are when they are, is that God's plans for us are better than our plans for us. Ask and you will receive. Well, the only reason you would be asking in faith is if you're asking for God's will. And if you're asking for God's will, then you will receive God's will. So we want to be careful when we read that, because it's not saying that you get anything you ask for. I'm a magic genie, right? And that's the same thing here. God's word isn't a magic genie to grant you wishes, but rather when you are in the word, your will becomes aligned with God's. And when you ask for God's will to be done, like we do in the Lord's Prayer, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, his will is done amongst us. So really, when we pray these, we're praying for good things to come, but we're really also praying that our will line up with God's, that his will be done. And for some people, like Joshua, he has a plan for success. For some people, he has a plan for smallness. For some people, like Judas, he had a plan specifically that Judas would be the one to betray Jesus, right? So everybody fits into God's plan. And when we pray for things, whether it's to be prosperous or not, what we're praying is that God's will be done in our lives. Because we know that when God's will is done, God is glorified. And when God is glorified, that's good for us. God's glorification is good for us. So we too are to live in God's word in the same way that Joshua is called to live in it. And when, like Joshua, we do tend to fail, I don't know about you, but I am not in the word every minute of my life, even though I can teach it and say that I should be. There are times when I do not have the Lord's word in my mind, and pastors and vicars sin too. You probably already know that. We sin too. It's not always in our mind, but when we fail to do so, we know that we have the word made flesh who now dwells in us. So with the coming of Christ, it isn't just us it's not just us trying to stay in the word, but Christ himself is also staying with us. So the word is now actively working to dwell in us, to live in our lives as well. So when we fail to do so, we can ask for that forgiveness and know that the word has not left us. These pauses as I scroll down are so that if there are any questions, you may ask them. All right. Enter Sandman. No, enter the promised land. I don't know why that. I just hear the word when enter starts the first sentence, and that's just the only thing that pops into my mind. I don't know. Enter the promised land. Louise is just giving me some real looks back there. Thank you. As Israel enters the promised land, if you know that you are coming in and it's your time to shine, the 40 years are up, you're ready to take over the land and claim what's yours, what do you think your first action would want to be? I'd be ready to fight. I'd have my sword drawn and ready to go, right? I'm rip-raring, ready to go, green mean fighting machine. And then instead they're waiting. So that's not the case that we see in Joshua. Those first 5 chapters are preparation for what's to come. So we see that the importance isn't necessarily on the strength of Israel, but on their faith, on God's power, not on their power. When you think of military strategy, Israel is not the one to look for military strategy. You'll hear more about that in the sermon, but Israel is not the one to look for military strategy. I won't give away Jericho, but I'll point out to like Gideon. You wouldn't take 300 men to go and fight 2 armies that have merged together to take care of you. We'll get to that in Judges eventually. Gideon's one of my favorite judges, but Israel is not the one to look for military strategy and tactics. They are one to look for relying on God, and as a counterexample when they inevitably fail to rely on God, which we see pretty early on here in Joshua as well. So as they enter the promised land, that is, they get this preparation period. So the crossing of the Jordan and the 12 stones. So the priests go into the Jordan with the Ark of the Covenant, and as soon as their foot hits the water, it splits. And the way they phrase it is it dams up at the above where the river's flowing down. So I think that's to the north. Usually it's to the north. So the river's flowing down and it dams up ahead, and they say they can see the hump of the water. The Jordan River is pretty shallow during the dry season, especially. This is during the rainy season, so it had overflooded its banks. It was still definitely smaller than the river running through town. It would not have been like an impassable thing, but it definitely would not have been fun to send an entire nation across it, right? So, and the way a pastor says it is, sure, it might not have been deep, but I'd still rather walk on dry land than get my feet wet. So the Jordan River, it was the rainy season, so the banks were flooded, but don't imagine the Mississippi, right, when you think of that. Don't imagine the river running through town. I keep saying the river running through town because I think it's the Iowa River, but I don't want to say that and then be told I'm wrong and don't know my geography. Okay, so the Iowa River. Honestly, it's probably, this is a Southern Illinois thing, but it's probably still smaller than the Kaskaskia River. Pastor's shown pictures of it before, but it's not very wide or deep. They could have crossed it. They might have been waist deep, right, during the rainy season, and it would have been a wider thing, but they split the river. That's not to diminish the effects of this. The river was still split, and it's still dammed up ahead, and it flowed again immediately as soon as the last priest's foot was out of the riverbed. All the water came back down. So the priests do that. All of Israel goes through. The 3 tribes that already have land, Manasseh, Gad, and Reuben, they're the vanguard. They go through with weapons in case anybody tries to attack Israel while the people aren't ready. And all of Israel passed. And then when they were there, they took 12 stones from the riverbed, 1 for each tribe from the river, and they made a pillar at Gilgal. And that pillar at Gilgal is somewhere for the next 400 years they keep coming back to when they want to remember the Lord's promise to them, the Lord's mercy. So they keep coming back to that altar of 12 stones at Gilgal for remembrance and for rededication. Again, that's a word I use a lot. Don't think it's the technical word to be used constantly, but I'll keep doing it until I find a better one. To come back to it for many of those purposes. They also then, after they cross, have circumcision and rest. I don't know. If I was going to fight a bunch of nations, I'm not sure I would want to purposefully hurt myself before I go into battle. But the Israelites were doing this because for the 40 years that they were in the desert, no one was circumcised. They did not circumcise any of the children. And so this circumcision was that action of the covenant in physical view once again. God's people were still called to that. And so at this time, all the men, regardless of their age, they were all under 50 or 60 because all the old generation had passed away, but they all were circumcised. And we'll move on past that part so nobody starts cringing thinking about it. So they were circumcised and then they rested. They waited until they were healed. So they crossed the Jordan River, they set up camp, they circumcise themselves, and then they sit there and wait. That's their military strategy as they enter into the promised land after 40 years. They didn't do this ahead of time. That would have been some nice prep before getting to the river, but no, they wait till they enter the promised land. And then they sit and rest. And then while they are resting there, they celebrate the Passover. Did somebody speak? Question? No? Okay. They celebrate the Passover while they're waiting. So once again, in the middle of enemy territory, when they could probably be attacked at any point, they're taking the time to do this and to continue to follow and do what God has commanded them. And at this Passover, it's interesting because Joshua tells us that when they celebrate the Passover, the manna does not come again. That is the end point of the manna that God sent down for them daily. Because now, at this point, they were to they were to live off the land of milk and honey. They were to live off the fruits of Canaan. They were in the promised land. They no longer needed God to provide the food for them like they did in the desert. And so this is kind of the end scene of God continuing to fulfill his promise of sustenance is by giving them this land. But that Passover is a neat turning point where the manna stops the next day. They end up doing all of that before they even start to march on Jerusalem. Not Jerusalem, Jericho. There we go. Right, get the right J word. There's a lot of them here, which really means they were a lot of Y words in Hebrew. I don't know why we turned Y into J, but we did. That's why it's Yeshua was Joshua's name, but Y became J. So we'll keep moving ahead. The walls come tumbling down. That's good. That's the last part. So I'll try and rush through a few things before we have to close. I say that at the 10 o'clock mark, so if Pastor's watching, he can feel good that I said I'm closing near now. The first battle in Joshua is that of Jericho. And in this battle, we see how Israel is called to destroy all that's within God's judgment. At that same time, we see an act of God's mercy, and that judgment comes for Israel as well as because of their disobedience. So, melting hearts. Throughout all of the land, we hear this when the spies go in. Rahab tells them all the hearts are melting because they've heard what happened at the Jordan River. So it was enough of a thing to see the river split that the tribes and nations and people inside of Canaan are talking about it, right? So the people are afraid. They can see God's power in action. God is not, in this case, a hidden God that may or may not exist. They can see him acting for the Israelites. They also have heard of the two kings they already beat on the other side of the river. So God's power is known and the hearts are melting. That's a phrase that's used often. Your courage is gone, right? There's a lot of courage in Joshua. Be strong and courageous is repeated multiple times. So there's a lot of courage, believing and acting, which you'll hear more about, or well, I guess you won't hear about it next week. You'll read about it next week because we'll just have the handouts. I'll explain that before we go. Rahab and the spies is of God's mercy in action. This is a land dedicated to destruction. But we see that when there is an act of faith by one of the people destined for judgment, God forgives them. There is a way out from God's judgment. It's repentance. It's recognizing that he is God. It's seeing his power and his wrath that's coming and saying, wow, we deserve this, but please have mercy and don't let this happen to me. We see that with Jonah when he goes to Nineveh, and Nineveh repents for that time, and God turns away his wrath on them. So there is mercy. Like I said last week, whenever we see an act of judgment, there's also mercy. It's one and the other. So both are happening. Whenever there is judgment, there is a way out of it. And so we see Rahab as an act of God's mercy in Jerusalem, somebody who sees God's power, protects these spies, even though they're coming to destroy Jericho, and asks that they protect her and her family. And they do. They get her and her family out safely, and Rahab ends up being somebody in the line of Jesus. When you look at the genealogies, when you get into the New Testament, the walls tumble, you hear about, but that's God acting for Israel. The people destroyed, God's judgment fulfilled. Everything is wiped out because all have sinned and committed adultery. But Rahab and her family asked for forgiveness, repented and wanted saved, recognized God as the true God. And so that's the mercy there. And then we have Achan's sin, where God's judgment comes down twice as hard on Israel, and they send a couple thousand people to go fight a little city, and they get just sent back, flying away, running away, a couple dozen killed. But what Achan did was kept some of the cloaks and money for himself. And we see at the beginning, this is another Sapphira and Ananias moment, like in the book of Acts. We see that at the beginning of a period, God's wrath, God's judgment, God's mercy, and God's actions are all on bigger display. The Battle of Jericho was very much God doing it for them to show that, hey, I am with you. The rest of the battles were pretty physical, but here God is acting. Here, God's judgment comes swiftly on Achan, right? Israel is defeated and they kill Achan and his family for what they've done because there is an example to be set that God's commands are to be followed. It's like with, I did this at camp all the time. You might have done this as parents as well. When you get a group of kids, teachers would understand this, you're always stricter at the beginning. Because if you're lenient from the get-go, those kids are going to walk over you like a welcome mat. So you are strict in your rules at the beginning because if you aren't, they aren't going to respect the rules at all. And so at the beginning of these periods, right? So the 10 command back at the when the Ark of the Covenant is made and the priest stumbles and touches it, and he's smited and killed right there because it is a holy ark not to be touched carelessly. That was a beginning of a period. Here, as they enter the promised land, the beginning of a period, Acts at the beginning of the new church. So we see these instances like that, where God's power and actions are on display more at the beginning. It's also the same thing with miracles, right? There's more miracles at the beginning of the church as God's word is spreading to prove that this is God's word than there are later on. The miracles get less and less as you read through the book of Acts. And there's a reason for that. God's power is more on display at the beginning to show that he is God, and then he lets his word do the rest of the work. All right. So for the next 2 weeks, you'll hear about this in second service as well. If you haven't heard this yet, because of the 2 different breakfasts, we won't be having Bible study. We will still be making the sheets for the next 2 weeks. They will be in the office for you to pick up if you're keeping a binder or a folder of these and want to make sure that you have every chapter done. We might have missed 1 or 2 at this point already, but for the next 2 weeks, we're going to make sure that they're in the office for you. So make sure to stop by and pick those up so that you can keep your 2-year through the Bible worksheets going, and they'll be more filled out than these. There won't be as many questions, but kind of explaining some of the big points. Boldly and confidently we pray, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Thank you all for coming again. We will see you up in church or see you next week.